the monster at your door on Halloween night isn't wearing a costume? What if the friendly mask of a trick-or-treater conceals a real human evil? An evil that arrives with an open bag for candy, but leaves behind nothing but a cold, empty silence and a life cut short. This isn't just a chilling thought exercise. It is the question that has haunted the rural community of Fort Dodge, Iowa, for decades, born from the chilling events of a single festive night that went horribly, irrevocably wrong in the autumn of 1982. The night was October 31st, 1982, a classic Midwestern Halloween with a sharp chill in the air and the rustle of dry leaves skittering across empty roads. In his secluded farmhouse, 67-year-old Marvin Brandland was ready for the evening's festivities. A hardworking and well-known farmer, he lived a life of routine and quiet solitude. He had his bowl of candy ready by the door, the single porch light cutting a lonely, yellow square into the oppressive darkness of the surrounding cornfields, waiting for the familiar ritual of costumed children and joyful shouts. But joy would not visit the Brandland farm that night. Instead, sometime under the cloak of that festive darkness, a visitor arrived with intentions far more sinister than collecting treats. The next morning, when Marvin's brother arrived for a routine visit, he was met not with a friendly greeting, but with an eerie, bone-deep silence. The porch light was still on, a silent sentinel that had witnessed the horror. The candy bowl sat untouched. Inside, the brother would make a discovery that would shatter the peace of their community forever. Marvin Brandland was dead, the victim of a brutal, cold-blooded murder. The scene was one of quiet, domestic horror. Marvin had been shot. There were signs of a brief struggle, but the house was not ransacked in the way a typical robbery would suggest. The motive was maddeningly unclear. Who would want to harm a quiet, elderly farmer? The initial investigation, led by the Webster County Sheriff's Office, began immediately. Canvassing a community plunged into a state of shock and fear. The holiday of innocent fun had been grotesquely twisted into a real-life horror story, and a phantom killer was now lurking in their midst. The central, terrifying problem for investigators was the date itself. On any other night, a masked figure seen approaching a house would be an immediate, high-priority lead. But on Halloween, the entire community was filled with masked figures. The killer had used the very fabric of the holiday as the perfect camouflage. Witnesses were interviewed, neighbors were questioned, but everyone reported the same thing. Countless children and teenagers in costumes, all blending into a sea of anonymity. The killer could have been anyone, hidden in plain sight, their true face concealed by cheap plastic and paint. Detectives struggled to build a profile of Marvin's killer. They explored every possible avenue. Was it a drifter, seeing an isolated farmhouse as an easy target? Or was it more personal? They learned Marvin had been involved in some minor land disputes over the years, the kind of disagreements common in farming communities. Could a long simmering grudge have finally boiled over into violence? They chased down these leads, interviewing anyone with a potential grievance against the farmer. But each path they took ultimately led to a frustrating and desolate dead end. The most tantalizing clue came from a group of trick-or-treaters who had been in the area. They spoke of seeing a person in a mask, but their descriptions were vague and contradictory, as one would expect from children on a dark, exciting night. One detail, however, seemed to stick. The figure was smaller, possibly a teenager, but this only deepened the idea that a youth, someone from their own community, could be capable of such a cold and calculated act was a thought too terrible for many to contemplate. The investigation was drowning in a sea of masks. As days turned into weeks and weeks into months, the trail grew colder. The initial flurry of activity slowed to a crawl. The case of Marvin Brandland's murder became a heavy, unspoken weight upon the community. Halloween in Fort Dodge was never the same again. A shadow of fear now touched the holiday. Parents held their children closer. Porch lights seemed less welcoming, and every masked face was viewed with a flicker of suspicion. The innocence of the night had been stolen, replaced by the chilling ghost of an unsolved crime. The case file, once thick with fresh reports and hopeful leads, was eventually relegated to a cold, steel cabinet. It became a piece of local folklore, a cautionary tale whispered among teenagers about the farmer who was killed on Halloween. The masked figure who knocked on Marvin Brandland's door had seemingly vanished back into the darkness from which it came, leaving behind only questions and a lingering sense of profound injustice. The years began to pass, each one adding another layer of dust and silence to the dormant investigation. For over 3 decades, the ghost of Marvin Brandland's murder lingered. Detectives retired, witnesses moved away or passed on, and the physical evidence from 1982 sat in storage, waiting for a technology that did not yet exist. The crime became a defining cold case for the region, a testament to the chilling reality that sometimes evil can strike and simply disappear without a trace. The killer, it seemed, had gotten away with it, growing older, perhaps living a normal life, their terrible secret locked away behind the mask of an ordinary face. The specter of the crime haunted not only law enforcement, but also the Brandland family, who were left without answers, without closure. Every Halloween served as a painful, annual reminder of their loss. They could only wonder who had committed this terrible act, and more agonizingly, why. The lack of a clear motive made the crime feel random, and all the more terrifying. It was an act of violence that seemed to have sprung from the darkness itself, senseless and absolute, leaving a permanent wound on the heart of their family. But secrets, especially those stained with blood, have a way of clawing their way to the surface. The breakthrough in the case would not come from a fingerprint or a newly discovered weapon. It would come from the most human of places. A conscience burdened by guilt and the looming finality of death. Decades after the murder, a woman, facing her own mortality, knew she could not take her secret to the grave. She had to speak. She had to finally give Marvin Brandland's ghost the justice it had been denied for so long. She approached investigators with a story that was both shocking and chillingly plausible. Her late husband, she confessed, had been haunted by his role in the events of that 1982 Halloween night. He wasn't the killer, but he was there. He had been the driver. He had waited in the car down the dark country road as his friend. A high school classmate named Lynn Burns walked up to Marvin Brandland's farmhouse. He heard the single, sharp crack of a gunshot echo through the cold night air before Burns came running back to the car. The name Lynn Burns was the first solid lead investigators had in over 30 years. It was a ghost from the past, a name that had never appeared as a major person of interest in the original investigation. Armed with this deathbed confession, a new generation of cold case detectives reopened the file. They found Jerry Burns, now a man in his 50s, living a quiet life in another state. He was an ordinary man, a business owner, a husband. On the surface, there was nothing to suggest he was capable of harboring such a dark and violent secret. The confession was a powerful lead, but it was still hearsay. The driver was dead, and his wife had only heard the story secondhand. The detectives knew they needed something more, something tangible and scientific to connect Burns to the crime scene from all those years ago. They began to meticulously re-examine every piece of evidence from the original 1982 file, hoping to find something that the investigators back then might have overlooked or lacked the technology to properly analyze. Their search was a long shot, a desperate hunt for a ghost in an archive of old paper and decaying memories. And then they found it. Tucked away in an old evidence box was a small, seemingly insignificant item. A coffee cup from the crime scene. It was a simple, disposable cup that investigators had collected from Marvin's kitchen. In 1982, it was useless. But now, in the 21st century, it was a potential time capsule. The detectives theorized that perhaps the killer, in a moment of casual arrogance or nervousness before the act, had taken a drink. If so, a trace of their saliva, their DNA, might still be clinging to the rim. The challenge now was to obtain a sample of Jerry Burns's DNA to compare it with any potential sample from the cup. This required careful and covert surveillance. Investigators began to secretly watch Burns, waiting for an opportunity. They followed him as he went about his daily life, a man completely unaware that the ghosts of his past were closing in. The moment came when Burns casually discarded a water bottle into a public trash can. The investigators quickly and discreetly retrieved it. A modern piece of trash that held the key to unlocking a decades-old mystery. The lab results were the breakthrough they had been praying for. The DNA profile developed from the saliva on the discarded water bottle was a perfect match for the DNA profile extracted from the rim of the 30-year-old coffee cup found in Marvin Brandland's kitchen. The ghost from Halloween night finally had a face, a name, and a scientific signature. The chain of evidence, cold for a generation, had been reforged. The link between Lynn Burns and the murder scene was now undeniable. A silent testament from beyond the grave. In December of 2018, more than 36 years after that fateful Halloween night, investigators arrested Lynn Burns for the first-degree murder of Marvin Brandland. The news sent shockwaves through both the community he now lived in and his old hometown of Fort Dodge. To his new friends and neighbors, he was just an ordinary man. To the people of Fort Dodge, his arrest was a stunning resolution to their most infamous and haunting local legend. The masked phantom from their collective nightmare had been a real person all along, one of their own. The trial presented a unique set of challenges. Prosecutors had to build a case based on events that had happened nearly 4 decades earlier. Memories had faded, and key witnesses were gone. However, they had 2 powerful pillars to build their case upon: the chilling second-hand deathbed confession of the getaway driver, and the irrefutable scientific certainty of the DNA match. They painted a picture of a teenager who, for reasons still unknown, put on a mask and, under the cover of a beloved holiday, committed an unforgivable act of violence. Burns, for his part, maintained his innocence throughout the trial. His defense argued that the evidence was too old to be reliable, and that the confession was nothing more than unreliable hearsay from deceased individuals. They portrayed Burns as a victim of circumstance, a man wrongly accused by a ghost story that had spun out of control. But Burns offered no explanation for how his DNA could have ended up on a coffee cup inside the victim's house, a place he claimed he had never been. His silence on that crucial point was deafening. The jury was faced with the task of looking at a man in his late 50s and seeing the teenager he once was. They had to weigh the testimony of a ghost against the certainty of modern science. After deliberating, they returned with their verdict: guilty of first-degree murder. A quiet gasp filled the courtroom. After 37 long years, justice had finally been served. The long, cold silence that had surrounded Marvin Brandland's death had finally been broken by the single, decisive word of the jury. Lynn Burns was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He would die behind bars, never again to walk free. He never confessed to the crime, never offered an apology, and most importantly, never provided a motive. The ultimate question of why would die with him. Was it a robbery that went horribly wrong? Was there some unknown personal grudge between the high school boy and the elderly farmer? Or was it something far more disturbing, a random act of thrill-seeking violence committed on a night when evil could wear a mask? The conviction brought a profound sense of closure to the remaining members of the Brandland family and to the community of Fort Dodd. The shadow that had loomed over their town for so long had finally been lifted. The case served as a powerful testament to the tenacity of cold case detectives and the incredible power of forensic science to reach back in time and bring a killer to justice. It was a victory for the patient and the persistent, a confirmation that no case is ever truly cold as long as someone is willing to look. The aftermath, however, left a complex legacy. The community had its killer, but the faceless specter of the crime was replaced by something arguably more disturbing. The face of a neighbor. Jerry Burns wasn't an outsider or a monster from a movie. He was a local boy who went to the local high school. He walked the same streets and lived a normal life among them for years before moving away. The evil that visited Marvin Brandland wasn't an otherworldly entity. It was homegrown. The story of Marvin Brandland's murder has become more than just a true crime case. It is a modern fable about the nature of secrets and the darkness that can hide in the most ordinary of places. It demonstrates how a single, violent act can ripple through time, affecting generations and permanently altering the character of a community. The conviction of Jerry Burns closed the legal chapter, but the emotional and psychological scars of that Halloween night remain a part of the town's identity. The farmhouse on the lonely country road is no longer just a piece of property. It is a landmark of local tragedy, a place forever associated with the town's darkest night. For those who remember 1982, it stands as a solemn monument to the man who was killed simply for opening his door on Halloween. It is a physical reminder that evil doesn't always announce itself with a roar, but sometimes arrives with a quiet knock and a friendly, deceptive mask. The case also serves as a chilling reminder of the dual nature of Halloween itself. It is a night of fantasy and fun, a time to pretend to be monsters and ghosts. But the Brandland case forces us to confront the reality that true monsters don't need costumes. They are human, and they can hide their true nature not for one night, but for a lifetime. Jerry Burns wore the mask of an ordinary man for 36 years. His secret buried deeper than any grave. Ultimately, the legacy of this case is the final, haunting answer to the question posed at the beginning. The monster at Marvin Brandland's door was not a creature of supernatural fiction. It was a boy from his own community, hidden behind the anonymity of a holiday. The horror was not that a monster came to call, but that the monster was one of us. A chilling truth that is far more terrifying than any ghost story. And so, the story of that horrific Halloween night in 1982 concludes not with a sense of complete victory, but with a somber, lingering chill. Justice found its man, but the ghost of the question, why, will forever haunt the fields of Fort Dodge. It reminds us that behind the festive masks we wear and the cheerful greetings we exchange, we can never truly know the secrets that lie dormant in the hearts of those who walk among us in the dark.